Hello and welcome, everyone. I want to thank those of you watching at home and all of our panelists tonight for joining us on the Colorado stop of the Road to Universal Background Checks tour hosted by Giffords. I'm Robin Lloyd, Managing Director of Giffords, and I have the honor of sharing the virtual stage tonight with my boss, former Congresswoman and Giffords co-founder, Gabby Giffords, Sandy Phillips, a survivor, gun violence prevention advocate, and founder of Survivors Empowered, and Governor John Hickenlooper, candidate for the U.S. Senate.
Hey, everybody.
We are.
No, I'm stopping the. I'm gonna have to relaunch us on Facebook and Twitter. Something got buggy in Facebook, so I'm just gonna stop that, and we're gonna have to restart. I'm terribly sorry.
Better safe than sorry.
Hello and welcome everyone. I want to thank all of you watching at home and to our panelists for joining us on the Colorado stop of the Universal Background Checks Tour hosted by Giffords. I'm Robin Lloyd, Managing Director of Giffords, and I have the honor of sharing the virtual stage tonight with my boss, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, Sandy Phillips, a survivor, gun violence prevention advocate, and founder of Survivors Empowered, and Governor John Hickenlooper, candidate for U.S. Senate. We're here to discuss universal background checks at the federal level and how they will make Colorado communities safer from gun violence. So far on this tour, we've been to states like Michigan, Kentucky, and South Carolina. And in every state, we have seen the immense popularity of background checks. We've also seen the immense popularity of this tour and have had over 1 million voters tune in so far. We are very excited to join you in Colorado tonight. Passing universal background checks is our top legislative priority at Giffords, and that's because it's both practical and popular. It is a foundational step toward making our communities safer from gun violence, and 75% of Coloradans agree. But in order to make that goal a reality, we need to have a gun safety majority in the Senate. And voters in Colorado have a huge responsibility in making that happen this year by electing John Hickenlooper to the Senate. Although we can't join in person today, we do want to make sure that we're hearing from you and hearing your voices. If you have questions during the conversation tonight, please put them into the comments section on Facebook or YouTube. And if you're watching on Twitter, use the hashtag #GunSafetyCongress. Before we get to our conversation, I want to share a little bit more about each of our panelists, starting with Governor John Hickenlooper. Governor Hickenlooper was governor of Colorado from 2011 through 2019. During his tenure, he was a powerful gun safety advocate and signed a number of pieces of critical gun safety legislation into law, including universal background checks and a bill limiting large capacity magazines. Prior to becoming governor, Governor Hickenlooper served as mayor of Denver and had the honor of hosting the 2008 Democratic National Convention when President Barack Obama was nominated. Now that we've seen our first ever virtual convention last week in Milwaukee, I wanted to ask you, Governor, how you thought things went, and of course, have you have the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, and it's an honor to be with you all. I am such an admirer of Giffords and all the work that you do. Watching the parts of the production, and it really was. I thought they did a great job of making a virtual production feel like a real convention in many important ways. But I did feel I wanted to be there. I wanted to be in the room. Obviously, with this campaign, I didn't watch all of it. I wish I could have, and I'm slowly catching up to the parts I missed. But I felt like I was among among old friends, and to see, especially President Obama and Michelle Obama, how beautifully they spoke and how they kind of just without any effort naturally bring people together. I think that's also what you're doing here. And I think Giffords has got that same magical ability to bring people together and let them see that, things like universal background checks, they're not that big a step, right? They're just keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people.
Absolutely. And I think what I really took away from last week, and of course, what we're going to talk about here tonight, is that, at so many levels of folks who are running for office this year, we have a very clear contrast. And of course, that starts at the top with Joe Biden and President Trump. And that's the case in Colorado as well, with you and your position on gun safety, and Senator CORY Gardner, who has refused to take action on the issue after being in office for so many years and having so many tragedies happen, not only in his home state of Colorado, but in all states across the country. So I'm very excited to continue the conversation tonight, to talk about the differences and why this policy is so important. Before we do that, I want to bring in Sandy Phillips as well. Sandy, thank you for being here. Would you mind sharing a bit more about yourself and how you got into the gun violence prevention space?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on this panel. I feel like I'm with old friends, which is a very comfortable feeling to be on a panel like this. In 2012, my daughter was killed in the Aurora Theater tragedy. She was shot 6 times with an AR-15. And living through that and trying to cope with that grief made me realize how many other people were feeling the same pain that we were feeling that didn't have any support, because we really felt like we were in Texas. A lot of other families were from other states, but the people in Colorado had one another. We had no one. So after the trial, we had moved to Colorado for the trial and lived in our little camper. And after that, we decided that we would go from state to state to state to reach out to other survivors and grassroots organizations on the ground to get interest in gun laws, number one. And number two, start responding to mass shootings across the country. We have been to 15 mass shootings now. And to let those people know that they have a hand to hold, that we're there for them, and we will see them through their re-entry into their new normal, which is not easy to do. So we're involved in a lot of ways. We're involved politically, of course. We were there when John Hickenlooper, the governor at the time, signed the bills into law, which was astounding for us, and felt very honored to be among the people there. And we have been on the road ever since until the coronavirus, and now we're in one place, but we're back on the road as soon as they lift the restrictions. We'll be out on the road again.
Thank you, Sandy. It's, I personally have enjoyed working with you. I speak for Gabby and I when we appreciate the leadership that you and Lonnie have brought to the movement and bringing survivor voices to the forefront of this fight. It is so important and critical, and we couldn't do it without you, not only in places like Colorado or Texas, but in states all across the country. And it's actually devastating to hear that you have been to 15 mass shootings. That's far, far too many, and it is truly astounding just to hear that number kind of in one sentence. That brings me to our final panelist, obviously a fellow activist who needs no introduction. But Gabby is a former Congresswoman and our co-founder. She's been leading the charge to pass background checks for years. We have a brief video to show about her fight in this. Let's take a look.
What is courage? What does it look like? Courage shows truth to power and stands its ground. It's walking out. It's sitting down. It's marching towards something greater. Courage is telling your story even when it's hard to speak. Courage looks like this.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Gabby Giffords from Southern Arizona. You can either complain about something or you can try to fix it.
I will always extend my hand across the aisle to do what's right for the American people, to build consensus, and to get the job done.
Earlier today, a number of people were shot in Tucson, Arizona.
Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, wounded in an assassination attempt just about 2 weeks ago, is about to take the next big step along what's expected to be a long road to recovery.
It takes courage to keep going, especially when it feels impossible.
And to witness the return of our colleague, who is the personification of courage, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
It's standing up and finding your voice again. Courage is speaking out. Courage is saying, we can do better. And knowing no problem is too big to fix.
Gabby, I have so much I could say about how inspiring it is to work alongside you, but I'm going to turn it over to you to share some words of hope.
I've known the darkest of days of pain and uncertain recovery. But confronted by despair, I've summoned hope. Confronted by paralysis and aphasia, I responded with grit and determination. I put one foot in front of the other. I found one word and then I found another. My recovery is a daily fight, but fighting makes me stronger. Words once came easily. Today I struggle to speak, but I have not lost my voice. America needs all of us to speak out, even when you have to fight to find the words. I'm also in a second fight, the fight to stop gun violence. It's also a fight forged by tragedy and pain, a fight that can change lives. We are at a crossroads. We can let the shooting continue, or we can act. We can protect our families, our future. We can vote. We can be on the right side of history. Please join us in this fight. Vote, vote, vote. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabby. That was so great to hear. And those words are so inspiring and full of hope in this time, which we all need. I'd love to kick things off and start the question period. Governor, I'll start with you. As governor, you were able to pass critical gun safety legislation, including background checks, making Colorado a model for the country. What did you learn from that process, and how do you plan to take what you learned from that experience to the Senate?
Well, I'll tell you one thing we don't see in Washington is the courage that Gabby just displayed and the willingness to speak out. I'm running against CORY GARDNER, and he has received the equivalent of more than $4 million of support from the NRA and gun manufacturers. And he is not willing to say a word. He questions whether universal background checks are useful or worth the $10 or the 10-minute delay in purchasing a firearm. I sometimes become speechless because to me, universal background checks are the fundamental building block to making a safer country. We're not taking guns away from people. We're making sure that people who are dangerous don't have a chance to buy guns. And when after the shooting in the Aurora movie theater where Sandy lost her daughter, 70 people were shot in that theater. 12 perished. We took on universal background checks the next session, and it was a battle by every measure. And we ended up having several Democratic state senators recalled because of that vote. And about halfway through, and I always tell the story just because it's, I came home and I was so frustrated. And I made the mistake of complaining to my son, Teddy, who at that time was in 5th grade. He was 11. And he looked at me and he goes, "Dad, come on. What do you do all day at work that's so hard? Make decisions? Listen, just get the facts, make a decision, check, next." I said, "Well, Teddy, it's not that." He goes, "Dad, get the facts, make a decision, check, next. Every day I've got to go to school, learn something completely new I didn't know existed the day before. If I don't get it perfect, the next day is misery. Everything's based on the day before." After 5 minutes, I said, "Teddy, you're right. 5th grade is harder than being governor." But I came into the office the next day realizing we didn't have our local statistics on, how many dangerous people really did try to buy a gun. And we stopped them by having background checks. We were getting to about 50% of all the purchases by following federal law that allowed us to get to 50% of the gun purchases. And it took us about 3.5 weeks to get our statewide data. We had national data, but we did not have the statewide data. And it was amazing. In a state like Colorado with 5.5 million people, 5.6 million people, there were 38 people convicted of homicide who tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them. There were 133 people convicted of sexual assault who tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them. In all, there were over 3,000 violent criminals who tried to buy a gun that we stopped. And yet we think there was close to an equal number who tried to buy a gun, probably with similar backgrounds, and we couldn't stop them. As a frame of reference, there were 420 people who had judicial restraining orders, not to see their ex-spouse or their ex-boss. They tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them. And just for those who think that crooks aren't stupid, that they'll never get a background check, which was many of the Republican General Assembly members. There were 140 people when they picked up their new gun. We arrested them for an outstanding warrant for a violent crime. So crooks are stupid. And I think that experience of seeing the power and impact of local statistics in your community, that there are 38 people convicted of homicide who are trying to buy guns, and we can stop them through no great effort, inexpensive, not a big distraction. And yet CORY GARDNER doesn't think it should be discussed on the floor of the Senate. CORY GARDNER supports Mitch McConnell, who's also a great recipient of National Rifle Association beneficence of their financial resources. They keep it from coming to the Senate floor because they know that it would pass and it would make this country a safer place.
That's so good to hear how you were able to do it in Colorado. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, your opponent has not only been the recipient of so much money from the gun lobby, but he's actually voted against the bill. He's blocked it. He doesn't want to see the bill. If he comes to the floor, he's going to vote against it. And at the end of the day, we do need this building block in place to make all communities across the country safer from gun violence, and including those in Colorado. And I think, you know, there's a real clear contrast between where you are on the issue and where CORY GARDNER is. Sandy, this next question is for you. I know you spent a lot of time traveling around the country. Certainly that was in a pre-COVID environment. What are the common themes that you hear from voters and fellow survivors when you talk to them about this issue?
Frustration, number one. They're very frustrated, as were we. We were in the gallery in DC after Sandy Hook, and when the universal background checks was voted down, and I believe the numbers were 56 votes yay and 60 no. We were 4 votes short. But in a regular democracy, had we not had the ways of the Senate under Mitch McConnell, we would have won that vote. So at first I was stunned and disappointed and frustrated. And then I thought, you know, it was a win if you look at it that way. So if you don't like the way the vote goes, you got to change the people that are in the House and the Senate and get the vote you want. So we've been working towards that ever since. So number one, I think the inaction of Washington has been the biggest frustration for most of the people that we talk to. We know that universal background checks work. We know that limiting capacity works. It's been proven in Colorado. And now we have other concerns as well, such as ghost guns and locking guns up safely in a home so children can't have access. So we've got a lot to do, but it starts with the lowest hanging fruit. And the lowest hanging fruit is background checks. So once we get that passed, then we can start looking at the other underlying problems and the other underlying solutions that we can get enacted in Washington.
Absolutely. And to your point about it being the lowest hanging fruit, it is just that, because it is so common sense. And we know that in the levels of support that we have from folks in Colorado. As I mentioned, 75% of Colorado voters support background checks. And over half of all voters are more likely to support a candidate who supports background checks. We know that it is the most basic thing that we can do, and we really need to elect leaders who are going to do it. So that is why we're here. We're talking to, obviously, John Hickenlooper, because he is one of those leaders. I'm going to turn it over to Gabby. I know, as a former member of Congress and now in your second active service here at Giffords, you have inspired so many people, both in Arizona and all across the country. But who has inspired you and motivated you to be who you are today?
John Lewis, the civil rights leader. I miss him a lot.
He is such an inspiration. I think we can agree that he is the epitome of true leadership. Yes. We have put together another video to share for you about the fight for gun safety in our country. It actually prominently features John Lewis, who is calling on all of us to take action. So with that, we are going to run the next video. But while you're watching the video, please submit questions in the comments section or tweet at us. Thanks. Let's take a look.
For the first time since the Clinton administration, the House of Representatives passes significant gun legislation.
This bill would basically require background checks for almost every gun sale or gun transfer in America.
Enough is enough. And our first order of business in the Senate should be to pass the House Background Checks Act.
As long as I'm the majority leader of the Senate, none of that stuff is going anywhere. I am indeed the Grim Reaper.
Over 90% of Americans support expanding background checks.
By closing these loopholes, we will make our communities safer.
We have a mission. We have an obligation. It is the right thing to do to save lives.
The Senate is a firewall for the NRA.
And change must come to Washington.
There are now more activists on the side of gun safety than on the side of the NRA.
Now is the time to come together. Be courageous. The nation's counting on you.
As you just saw in that video, we have so many courageous activists involved in this movement. And so I'd love to make sure that we hear from them. I think we have had a few questions come in. Sandy, our first question is for you. It's from Marcus in Denver. He asks, Sandy, Colorado has made a lot of strides on gun safety, but that's not true everywhere, and some states seem to be moving backwards. Where can I focus my energy to improve circumstances in places that need it most?
That's easy. Vote, number one, and vote for those people who are speaking out on this issue in favor of universal background checks and other bills, and re-elect people who have already done the work, like John Hickenlooper in Colorado. He's proven that he is going to be on our side on this issue and do the right thing. But it's important that I think people understand that voting is a responsibility that has to happen in every election. It has to start at the local, within the city government even. We know that the far right has put people in place in school boards. So it starts voting for the people that you know will back good laws on guns in schools, to be sure that our schools are safe. And then it's important to vote in the state elections. So it's not just, vote for the primaries and the presidential election. It's important to vote in every election on the people that are going to stand up for good gun safety laws. And we were lucky enough to be in the room when Governor Hickenlooper signed the bills into law. And there's nothing better than knowing that the work that you've done and the people that you voted for are really creating safer communities.
That's so true. And it certainly feels like, because it is true, that the stakes have never been higher than this year, and it's not, it's on every aspect, and gun violence continues unabated, even though we are in the midst of a global pandemic. And in fact, it's just getting worse. So we really do need to have leadership at every level, to your point, Sandy, that is going to work to solve this issue. The time is now, and we must all do what we can. The next question is for Governor Hickenlooper. It's from Cassidy in Denver. Governor, we often hear of places like Chicago that have strong gun safety laws, but still have record levels of gun violence. The same is true for Denver, which saw a surge of gun violence this July. How can a federal law address this issue?
Well, that's another great question, and it does point out that we do need a national solution. What we have now is a patchwork quilt of laws and regulations in different communities, different states, different metropolitan areas, different cities, and they don't interface very, very successfully. And oftentimes you'll find out where it's much more restrictive and you have to go through a background check to buy a gun in one community, you can just go 20 miles and buy all the guns you want. And in some cases, you create a black market in handguns and firearms of all kinds, assault weapons. And that's exactly the wrong way to go about trying to make our country safer. We need a framework by which we can get background checks for every single person who wants to buy a firearm, whether it's a handgun, whether it's a rifle. Let's make sure that we're not allowing, firearms to get into the hands of truly dangerous people. Right now, we have so many loopholes, and these loopholes have been created, I think, in most cases, or certainly in many cases, with the intentionality from the lobbyists for the National Rifle Association, and people like Senator Gardner, who have been great recipients of that financial support in their campaigns and while they're in office. Again, it's not so surprised. Most people end up dancing with the person who brought you to the dance. If you get elected with the support of NRA money, you're going to spend a little extra time listening to what their point of argument is. And I think a national solution allows us to have consistency across this country and make sure that there isn't the same incentive for black market behavior, and that we don't have large amounts of firearms going into cities like Chicago that really do, make Chicago a more dangerous place. So, that's part of why I want to go to Washington and really fight hard to make sure we do get to universal background checks.
Absolutely. The only way that we are really going to make sure that we close these loopholes in our law of having a strong national standard. And what we're talking about here is saying that no matter how you buy a gun, no matter where you are in the country, no matter who you're buying it from, you have to have a background check. It is so common sense, and we know so many Americans overwhelmingly agree with us. Gabby, this last question is for you. It's from Sylvia in Boulder. Gabby, it was so inspiring to watch you last week during the Democratic National Convention, and you've made remarkable gains in your ability to walk and talk. Are you optimistic about your continued recovery?
It will be a long, hard haul, but I'm optimistic.
That's great. That's so good to hear. Thank you. I think that's a really positive and strong note to end our question and answer session on. But before we leave you tonight, I want to make sure our panelists have an opportunity to share some parting thoughts. So Sandy, if you don't mind, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you all for being here today and inviting me to speak on this panel. But I did want to tell a personal story about John Hickenlooper. After he signed the bills, a few months later, we returned to Colorado, and I made a plaque for him that had Jesse's picture on it, and as a reminder of why he signed the bills, to never get weak or get torn up about the attacks that you get from the far right. And just to remind him, he did it not only for her, but for all the other people who have lost their children and their loved ones to gun violence. So I presented it to him in his office, and we took a picture, and we left the office, and I thought that that would be the end of it. It would get stuck in his drawer somewhere or in a closet. And the next thing I know, I saw him on, I think it was Sunday morning, and right in the middle of the frame was Jesse's plaque, and her picture was smiling right over at us, and it meant the world to me. So thank you, Governor Hickenlooper, for not only doing that, but remembering Jesse and remembering why there are so many of us out there fighting for good gun laws. And to the people that are listening and are wondering how they can get involved, first of all, use your right to vote, number one, but get out and contribute. If you can, get out and walk, phone bank, write postcards, both in this election in your state and in the national election. It's very important that you become involved in this process and not just sit back and watch CNN, MSNBC, and be a couch quarterback. It's important to be out there and get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. That is so touching. Governor, I'd like to turn it over to you to say a few words if you'd like.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the Giffords organization, Congresswoman Giffords. Thanks for this incredible event. And Sandy, it's great to see you. You know, the roads to universal background check and to winning the Senate majority both go through Colorado. And I am honored to have your support in this race. The last time I saw Congresswoman Giffords was the week before we all started working from home back in March. And she came down to Colorado. We met with some survivors and rallied for action in the Butterfly Pavilion, no less. Yeah. The world feels different now. COVID-19 is there everywhere, but we still face a fierce need for action. And Colorado knows too well the devastation of this national epidemic of violence. I was there the morning after the Aurora shooting, and I saw that first video, and I will never forget it. I mean, after Aurora, we brought people together to enact common sense reforms. And we took on the gun lobby. We passed universal background checks. We passed limits on magazine capacity and a law to get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. But while we in Colorado were making progress, Washington failed us. And Senator Gardner, as I've said, has benefited from over $4 million in spending from the NRA. I'm sure there's more to come this year, but he has a record to show for it. He's opposed closing the boyfriend loophole, the Charleston loophole, the gun show loophole. We might as well put all those loopholes together and we can call it the GARDNER loophole. This isn't a partisan issue. There are many Republicans, many independents who agree that we need to take common sense steps to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. And many responsible gun owners know that we need to fix these laws. But for whatever reason, Senator Gardner voted against the bipartisan Manchin-Toomey bill to expand background checks and require they be done for guns sold online or at gun shows. I mean, Colorado and America deserves better. In the U.S. Senate, I'm going to work to do just what we did here in Colorado, bring people together, finally take action to curb gun violence. My campaign's rolled out a bold gun safety plan. These are common sense measures that are going to help make communities safer, while at the same time protecting our Second Amendment rights. I hope you can all take a look at Hickenlooper.com. Check it out. I mean, too many lives have been lost. Too many communities and families have had to suffer because of our dysfunctional government that refuses to act to keep us safe. So with the support of Coloradans, Congresswoman Giffords, and all of you joining us today, that's going to change when I become Colorado's next senator. So thank you all for being here. Again, thank you to the Giffords organization and Congresswoman Giffords. It's a delight to see you again. And I've done a few Zooms with your husband, and it's just great to see the connection because you really are a great team. It's just great to see you again.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor to have this conversation with all of you tonight, and to hear from Gabby and Sandy, and of course, Governor Hickenlooper. I hope that this conversation inspired you to vote, to volunteer, to talk to your friends and family, but to do something to take action and save lives from gun violence. As the governor just said, the road to the Senate majority leads through Colorado. And it is so critically important that we have John Hickenlooper in the Senate fighting for gun safety for Coloradans everywhere. So this is going to be a close race. CORY GARDNER tries to sell himself as a moderate, but that's just not the case. He has taken over $4 million from the NRA. He has voted with President Trump 90% of the time. He is not the leader that we need him to be when it comes to gun safety. So it is so important that all of you out there get to the polls, talk to your friends and family, and we can send a message to Mitch McConnell and President Trump that you can't gaslight the people of Colorado on an important issue like gun safety. They know CORY GARDNER's record, and they know that they want John Hickenlooper in the Senate. So that's what we need to do this November. And that's the type of leadership that we need to have in order to really save lives from gun violence. So as the governor noted, you can visit his website at hickenlooper.com to sign up to volunteer or to contribute financially. But what's most important is that we all do what we can to make sure that we can pass universal background checks as the starting point to making our communities safer from gun violence. So with that, I will say goodnight to all of you and thank you again to Gabby, Sandy, and Governor Hickenlooper for joining us tonight. We appreciate it, and we'll be back on the road soon, so you'll be hearing from us some more. Thank you.
Thank you.